So I'm from an independent interpretation company, but quite honestly, we've been working so closely together on Caroline that it's
for such a long time.
It's effectively the National Museum and the Royal Navy. So that's who we are this afternoon. I think a bit of background on Caroline. We're assuming that people know where Caroline is, know a little bit about Caroline, but I think it's worth recapping. So Andrew, as head of historic ships, do you want to?
Well, Caroline, as Jeff, and I must pay testament before I start, to Jeff, who's done all of these slides, because I just say I'm too busy, Jeff help, and Jeff fixes it for us. That's the way it's been all the way through this project. But as we've got on the slide here, she's a light cruiser, and that effectively means that it's her job to sit out in front of the great big battleship fleets and protect them against attack by small torpedo craft. And if she gets the chance and comes against the enemy's cruisers and indeed battleships, then she's to charge off into the sunset and have a pop at them. And she's designed at a time when the Royal Navy suddenly begins to realise that their expectations for how a war is likely to be fought in the North Sea are wrong, to be blunt, and that the Germans are not going to behave in the way we always expected. So she's a modified design from the first of this type of light cruiser. She's laid down early on in 1914, and of course, in the course of 1914, it becomes very apparent that war is going to arrive, and indeed war does arrive, and there's a huge effort to get this type of ship ready and commissioned and out on patrol incredibly quickly. And as a result of that, she does have the fastest build time of any major fleet unit, certainly in the history of the Royal Navy, and I've not found one for any other navy that was built any quicker than her, which is something I think a large number of people that were involved with building her were really rather proud of. Of course, as everyone in this room will know, she is most famous really now as the only ship remaining from the Battle of Jutland, 31st of May 1916, the only major clash of battle fleets to occur between the Royal Navy and German Navy in the First World War. And she has been here for a little over 90 years now, so Belfast has very much been her home. And really one of our challenges was to try and reflect all of that in the work we were going to do.
So, aims and objectives. We had to save the ship. We had to safeguard the fabric as necessary, and that meant that making some quite difficult decisions about the way we went about that. There was a conservation management plan, and that establishes all the basic rules for our approach. Everything has to be done in the context of the conservation management plan. Do we conserve fabric? Do we repair? Do we replace? Do we reconstruct? And all of that has to be recorded. Because what's important is that we're providing Caroline with a sustainable future, which means that we have to make her accessible, we have to get people on board, we have to make it a safe visit, and just bring off the bottom of the screen there, we have to make all of that inform and drive the interpretation. And that's important. What interpretation is driven by all of those things. That slide shows two of the very difficult decisions we had to make. There are two structures on the ship that were not there in 1916, and of those two, only one of them has survived for reasons that I think we'll come to as we go through the slides. But those are examples of difficult decisions we had to make as we went along. So getting visitors through the ship, there she is, she's on 4 decks. 2 decks, it's relatively easy to get people through, that's the red lines. The purple lines represent a different challenge altogether. All access to those decks is by vertical ladder. And if we spread that out, you can see that we're trying to get visitors through 5 different decks. We have to make decisions about putting in lifts, and we have to work out a way that they can get through the complex structure of the ship safely, and also in a meaningful way, so they actually understand what they're seeing and why they're seeing it. We have to communicate all that information to the shipwrights, the steelworkers, the rest of the team. We had to consider all of those changes in the context of the conservation management plan. We had to look at the archaeology of the ship. This is 2 deckhead ceilings, cabin deckheads, looking for remains of structures that were once there, trying to work out what they were for, how they worked. As the ship was stripped back for repair, archaeology began to emerge, and really the plan was to try and turn something that looked like that, understanding what we're dealing with, and make it look like that. So what are our sources? What have we got to play with? How do we know what we're looking at? We've got dockyard plans. These are printed plans, 4 meters long, produced by the dockyard, 1/48 scale. We've also got some photographs Andrew took at the archives, and they actually begin to show us quite a lot of detail. And if we tweak the colours up a bit, we can see that we've got the sofas are red for leather, bookcase that's a sort of brown for timber. The metal structures, the steel structures are shown in the sort of purpley blue. And we've also got some changes made. These plans updated in 1919, where, for example, we've had more rifle racks added as she goes to the Far East, and those are coloured a sort of very pale turquoise. So we've got plans to play with. And I think, sorry,
I'm just a glamorous assistant really here today too.
Right, okay.
But I think just one of the points we'll make about this is we're very, very lucky in as much as the ship we had surviving was Caroline, and she is constructed over that period of 1914. She's designed really late 1913, and this is the absolute peak as far as the Royal Navy Constructors' Office is concerned. You have hordes of draftsmen that are very, very skilled at laying out plans like this. So every single ship constructed for the Royal Navy up until late 1914 has sets of plans that are laid out like this, that show you not only the location of the cabins, well actually we have these cabins intact, certainly for this area around the wardroom, but we've also got noted down here the pattern numbers for the sofas, so we know exactly which type of sofa is on there, and as Jess says, it's material. But interestingly enough, just this shot shows you how the pressure of war begins to impact upon and eventually destroy the way that the construction office, the design department, used to work. Because whenever you made a change to a ship, well then you've got plenty of apprentices who are here to learn their trade, and they would go away and they completely redraw this, and they just show that the ship's office had been taken out. Well, when you're in the middle of the war and you have a couple of thousand ships in some way, shape or form that you're looking after and that you're making amendments to and that you've got to control, you've not got the time. So all of a sudden you just get things struck out. And one of the things Jeff's going to touch on is that as you go through the period, the level of detail in these plans decreases and decreases and decreases. The flip side is it can on occasion make it very difficult to work out what's going on when and exactly what the ship looked like at any given stage.
Yeah. So there is a detailed plan, 1914, 1919, and as Andrew said, you can see here where at the bottom here, the dynamo room, they've taken out the electrical store and they're going to put a dynamo in because they need more power for the searchlights. So on the 1914-19 plans, we just got all crossed out and it says dynamo room written in pen there. And you can see the stokers' wash places and the petty officers' wash places up on the right-hand side. If we go to the next set of plans, so here we are, we've got these are now the 1925 plans. You can see the level of detail has dropped considerably. However, they've drawn in the dynamo, because the dynamo is still in situ. So actually we now know something that we didn't know previously. But look at the level of detail that has disappeared. And look, we've begun to get pencils scribbled in, showing where we end up with timber partitions and is this going to be a lecture room or not. That level of detail is dropping. The next big refit in the 1950s, so this is now both these refits in Belfast, in the 1950s, that level of detail has dropped even more. In fact, you can see the dynamo is now just a shape and it's being crossed out as it's going. We've got none of the detail, the wash places. But we actually have got information about who occupied which cabin in the red, and some instructions for how the ship is going to be modified to turn her into a drill ship and a training ship. So plans, we've got the plans. We've also got the fantastic dockyard model. Same size as the plans, 148, 3-4 meters long, fantastic level of detail. There's a problem with this as a source though, because it is actually, it's a piece of PR, it's a marketing tool, so it doesn't necessarily reflect what was built. And we'll come on later to talk about the navigating bridge. You see it there with 4 windows at the front and 2 at the side, but we'll have a look at that later. And you might also think, well, it gives us the colour. It tells us what colour the ship was painted. But I think you can see from this slide that because of the varnishes that have been applied and the type of paint that's been used to paint the model, we've got a variation. Those 2 greys should actually be the same, but the varnish has faded, turned yellow, and turned that into a sort of mucky green. So it doesn't necessarily provide as many answers as we might think. The guns, on the other hand, actually, the level of detail there was very, very useful. We've got photographs. This is a photograph from the album of Lieutenant Cornwallis, who was he was in charge of men's football for a start. So, fantastic photograph. It begins to tell us a bit about the ship as well. We've got Captain Crook's own invention, the blast matting that there stood hanging up that rope. We've got some shells on the right-hand side, on racks up on the side of the bulkhead there. There's Cornwallis again in the middle. Fantastic detail. And Andrew, do you want to just chat us through what we've got in?
See, this is actually at the aft end on the quarterdeck. You've got a 6-inch gun, and of course, one of the things we've had to do with Cannon, she is a warship. Warships do have guns. We hadn't any to start with, so we've had to reconstruct them. And a photo like this is fantastic, down to the detail it gives for how you lace the blast bags into place. And we have a fantastic canvas maker we use for all of our canvas work on historic ships who's done that for us. But you also get the details of the race plates, the storage arrangement for the shells, depression bars, and these are very important because in the heat of battle, gun crews can get overexcited. And basically, if this gun rotates round to fire forward, that depression bar makes sure that it can't shoot Caroline rather than the enemy. So it's a really important piece of kit. But you also get this wonderful flared skirt up here. Great detail on that, and that's because there's another one of these sat on top. These are the captain's quarters here, some of the quarters of the senior officers sat up there. And of course, if that gun is firing directly over your head, and you don't have that blast skirt, the blast effect is what the Navy charitably called extremely unpleasant. So that is absolutely critical for ensuring that this gun can be operated in a time limit. But when it comes for us reconstructing that, you show a steelworker now a 2D plan, very, very difficult for them to really get what we need to be generated. And of course, what you can't do with a ship like Caroline is give very, very specific measured drawings, because you're trying to make modern materials and fittings fit something that was built 102 years ago. So Petrichor and Jeff's team pulled together all these source information, and if we needed the blast screen reproducing, then we would hand that over to our contractor Blue Marine and say, look guys, that's what we need, this is what we need it to look like, you go away and turn that into reality for us, and they really performed pretty well.
I think it's back to that point about collaboration and information, and the team worked together on Caroline extremely well, and it was that relationship that allowed so much good work to happen. Here's another photograph from Cornwallis's album. This is it's the American officer, American ship, New York.
Yes.
And this is the first recorded incident of jazz concert.
European waters, yeah.
European waters, jazz concert in European waters on Caroline, and this is the American officers mingling with Caroline's crew. Again, we have nice detail of the boats, but there's a bit of social archaeology, if you like, emerging from that. Mr. Foxon, Frederick Foxon, he was an electrician on board. He was an electrical instrument maker, and he turned up and volunteered. Then he is lounging on the ammunition next to the 4-inch shells on one of the wastes. So again, telling us quite a lot about the ship and what these little cases were used for. His photographic archive. He played in the Caroline String Orchestra. He's at the back, in the middle, on the stairs up at one of the wastes. Next to him on the left is a young chap, boy telegraphist, William Crick. Now, William Crick, he also had some photographs. It's interesting with the photographic archives, because quite often the same photograph appears. And I think what is clear is that those people with cameras were taking photographs, and they were then selling them as souvenirs to other members.
And in fact, one of the nice photos we do have is a photo taken on the waist of Caroline, where someone has set up their photographs, their wares, for anybody to buy. And so Fred Foxon here has the same photo as we've just seen in the Cornwallis album of the Americans arriving, and he talks about the jazz concert. And he's rather forlornly written on the back of that he didn't get to see it because he was working down on a dynamo which had gone wrong. And it's those little snippets that you wander through Caroline, and you do get a real feel for her, but the diaries and the photographs really bring to life the crew and the people, and of course that's incredibly important when we're trying to interpret her and display her.
So again, Mr. Crick on the right-hand side, middle row. But what Mr. Crick left us, what William Crick left us, was his diary, or two diaries, from joining Caroline right the way through. So there's the cover, that's his 1916, 1917 diary. So there's the page where, not necessarily during the battle, but he writes about 5 or 6 pages in the Battle of Jutland. And he describes in the middle where the captain at fore control was as cool as a cucumber, and the way he handled the carry was wonderful. He then goes on only 2 or 3 lines later to record the Invincible exploding the loss of...
I mean, this is remarkable, I think, for us, is that I think he was 16?
16.
Just 16. And his writing is just fantastic. They are very, very readable diaries about his experiences and the gossip of being on board. And because everything is new to him, he's interested in everything, and it seems that he's pretty much all over the ship. And so it's a wonderful resource for, again, helping us to pull together the information we've seen in photos and plans to fully understand them.
It's as if we've given him a brand new Jaguar to play with. He regards Caroline Carey as the fastest, the best, the cleanest. It's modern. It's even got an auxiliary wireless telegraphy room, which is where he's stationed. So his diaries. We've also got the captains. This is the captain's order book, and here he covers everything from when you can have a smoke and how you should cut your hair. He didn't like fringes, did he? Didn't like fringes.
Very specific over how long beards had to be. After 2 weeks, an officer had to be able to run his fingers through your beard, and if he could still see his fingers, then you weren't capable of growing a proper beard, and you had to shave it all off. Are you sure you're not touching anything?
So, but here he's describing in some considerable detail, in fact we move to the next page, he's describing in some considerable detail the arrangements for manning the fore-upper bridge, so that's where the captain's stationed, and how the conning towers work in relation to, or how the different steering positions work in relation to that.
There's 3 steering wheels on the ship, and which one you steer the ship by will depend upon the individual circumstances. And of course, you don't have all 3 wheels connected at the same time. So you need a procedure for making sure that the ship is always under control. And this is where he gives us that detail. But again, it's very difficult to make sense of the plans or the photos without this level of instruction. The beauty of this is it's written as an instruction. It's written as a how-to guide. After a while, you really begin to feel that you know this chap. He's a wonderful, wonderful character. Caroline is his first seagoing command. He's a gunnery expert, a gunnery nut, and we'll touch upon that in a minute. But this is his chance, this order book is his chance. He's God at sea. No one is higher than him on his ship, and he can have the ship run however he wants. And it's his opportunity for all those foibles that have really annoyed him when other people have been the captain. Well, they're not going to happen on his ship, and that's what you see coming through here.
And it's a sum of all these parts. This is another publication, probably written by him, but it's the sort of Caroline's. It's her fighting manual, fighting stations. So here he's dividing all the guns up into their various groups. He's describing how you fight different targets, whether you've got 3 targets on the same side or 2 targets on one side and one on another.
Because it is worth pointing out, the guns on Caroline, it's not a case of you're in your gun crew and you decide what you're going to shoot at. Okay. It's all controlled centrally, which is why it's very important. The central will give you the range, it will give you the bearing, it will tell you when to fire. usually. So he goes from what do you do if you have 2 targets on the same side all the way to what do you do if you have 3 targets, 2 on one side and 1 on the other, or 4 targets on one side. It's all very, very clearly split up. Unsurprisingly, it takes him a long, long time to train the crew to be familiar with all of these drills and all of these circumstances.
Crick has some fantastic accounts in his diary of saying, right, well, the captain's dead, but the captain said that he's gone wandering off and he's lighting fires here, there, and he's doing this and checking on that, and it's the lad knew how to write. So, but here at the bottom, we've got how to communicate, and communication on the ship. This is always something that exercised our minds. Here there's clearly telephone, it says that communication by telephone, but also the voice pipes. Now this is when the sources, so we've now gone through our sources begin to impact upon our archaeology. There's a cupboard just outside the dry canteen there, which is sight setters headpieces. Those almost certainly are leather headpieces with voice pipes attached. So the sight setter wears this tightly over the head, all they can hear is the voice pipe communication. And if we drop a deck down, so we're on the lower deck here, we're going to drop down to what's called the platform deck. There's the lower conning tower with all those instructions that Crook outlined. We've got a complete set of ship's instruments down in that space there where all the red arrows are. Next to it is the fire control room. That's where chaps are sitting with mechanical computation.
Yeah, they call it the clock, and it's effectively, in broad terms, it's a computer, because of course when you're shooting at range, when you're going at a speed and in a direction, the enemy's going in a speed and a direction, and that speed and the direction can be changing because people are steering the ship and going faster and going slower, and they're a long way away. When you shoot, by the time your projectile lands where they were, they're not there anymore. So this is a means of saying, well, if they're going that fast in that direction and they're speeding up, they're probably going to be in that bit of water by the time the shot arrives, so that's where you need to shoot. And that is happening at those 2 clock tables there. And that information is then passed up to the guns via headsets.
So here's all the theory. Here we've got diaries, we've got photographs, we've got plans, we've got descriptions. Let's have a look at the archaeology, the physical archaeology of the ship. That is in the deckhead, the ceiling of the fire control room. Now given we've got AB gun, XY guns, the Z guns at the back, we know from the manual are under a different set of controls, and we've got 2 torpedo tubes. That's 6 things that need controlling by voice pipe. Well here, we've got 6 medium-sized holes, 6 large holes, 6 small holes. It's nice to think that that is the evidence for voice pipe and electronic communication between all of those guns in the fire control room. This is the lower conning tower. So it's down a ladder from the lower deck. Here we can see at the top of the picture on the left and right hand side, those are the positions for the port and starboard engine room telegrams. The position just disappearing at the bottom on the right hand side, that's where the revolution telegraph went. And in the middle we've got a compass binnacle, and we've got a helm, ship's wheel, and we've got a ladder coming down through the communication tube, and that is in the deckhead again, and that is a tube that men will climb up and down to communicate with the forecastle, the bridge, down to the lower conning tower. So we're right down deep in the bowels of the ship here. This entrance, that didn't exist at the time, so you were steering the ship by instruction from a box 3 decks down with no visual clues at all. That entrance was cut in the 50s, and beyond that, this is our auxiliary wireless telegraphy office where young William Crick would have been based. The little angled pads you can see at the top, in fact, if we go to the next one, Andrew, if you could just point. This is where it was what called the silent cabinet, and this is a wooden cabinet, insulated, padded out with horsehair and timber, and that's so you can hear your equipment, because you're not dealing with modern amplification. It's something really quite weak and feeble. Or
so if you've been doing this for a while, you can tell if the signal's very faint, they're quite a long way away. If it's very, very loud, they're on top of you. And after a while, you will be able to estimate the distance the ship communicating with you would be. But of course, you can also hear the enemy. You won't understand them, but you can estimate range, which is why radio silence becomes really quite important later on.
It's a very new skill as well, and it's the flag officers. They've been around for years, and they've been hundreds of years. Flag officers, it's a gentleman's pursuit. Wireless telegraphy, it's come out of the torpedo school. It's electronics, and there's an interesting. At this date, there's an interesting. They don't actually communicate with each other. Flags are completely separate from wireless telegraphy, which is regarded as a bit sort of...
Both signalling, but totally different approaches run by totally different people.
So this is now physical remains we've got left on the ship. The other space is where the equipment itself went, the high voltage equipment, and there's even accounts of cryptodiode lightning coming down, hitting the areas of the ship, and actually sparking within the cage where all the electrical equipment is stored. And if we look, so we're now looking at, that's the light bulb in the centre there. Top left, you can just see a faint circle, and that is where that is where the aerial tube went all the way up to, and basically the mast. There were no sails. The mast actually was for carrying the aerials as much as anything. So auxiliary wireless telegraph. The bridge, we mentioned the bridge when we looked at the model. This is the bridge we inherited. So it's clearly had 4 windows at one time. It's now got sort of 2 bug-eye portholes. Our theory regarding the bridge is that it was designed to have 6 windows, but in reality, Caroline went to sea with only 2. All the photographs only show these 2 central windows. So we took out the bug-eye portholes, we didn't want those, and we actually brazed these apertures shut, because we think the bridge was designed to have 6 in peacetime, but at war they're unnecessary. And most of the photographs show that completely covered with protective matting anyway. So that's looking at the interior. Interestingly, the whole structure is made of brass, so it doesn't affect the compass. All of it, the rails, all the bulkheads, everything, it's all made of brass. Those are the 2 doors which have been sealed up. So what should have been 2 cabins, a chart room, a captain's sea cabin, and the steering position, have been turned into one great big opening. On top of that, taking off there's a rather heavy lookout position. On top, steel lookout position, modern one, that was taken away. We have the original planks still on the top, so those planks have been to Jutland, and that is where the rangefinder was positioned. So the net result of all that is a bridge that looks much more like we think it did at Jutland. 2 central windows. You can see the relationship of the cabin at the back with the 2 portholes, the captain's sea cabin, and a relatively open steering position. And the fore control position, that is completely open. It's just got some matting around it and a short glass windshield. But that's where the ship was controlled from, steered from, and the aiming of the forward guns took place. Bats and plans. This is a favourite space really. Andrew, do you want to just talk us through what the plans?
Absolutely. So Caroline's designed to do a job, and as with any warship that's built in peacetime, when she gets into the thick stuff, you realise that a good portion of the things you'd assumed turned out to be wrong and need to be changed. And one of the things that does need to be changed on Caroline are the type of guns she has, the distribution of the guns, and the outfit stowage. So what we have here, again, is we started with a 4-inch shell room, as you can see here, and this went through a process of being subdivided and changed, and the spirit room was moved from aft because that had to disappear. So we ended up with actually quite a confusing space as it appeared on the plans. We didn't really know exactly when this was done and exactly how it had been done, but fairly significant evidence of change.
Because you can see we've got lines of bulkheads actually go through things labelled as outfit boxes. They just cut straight through the middle. So in the 1925 plans, a bit like the dynamo, they're actually drawing what had been put in, what those changes were. And if again we dip down to the archaeology, this is what became the 6-inch magazine. So it's got cordite cartridges in it. It was a 4-inch shell room, but it's been lagged. It's been covered in timber, and behind the timber is asbestos lagging. So this is one issue that we had to solve with the ship. We actually had to decontaminate the ship before we could carry out work. On the deckhead, we have a sprinkler system. It's a magazine. If that magazine should be compromised, if there was a danger that it was going to catch fire, it could explode. So you turn the stopcock, and these showers came to life and flooded the magazine in pretty short order. And you could do that from the decks above. You didn't have to be down there to set the sprinklers off. When the lagging was removed, and that's the same view we had before, we now see the evidence for the 4-inch shell room. So we've got shell racks, and I'll show you a slide that makes sense of those. But it's a series of shelves on which the shelves are kept, and they're held in with some vertical timber battens. Chalked on the bulkheads, we've even got the instructions to lag. Now the lagging took place in October 1918. It's quite late in the war. The changes to the magazine took place in October 1918. But in February 1919, she was refitted to go to the East Indies. They're suddenly concerned about temperature and the effect of hot tropical climate might have raised the temperature in these spaces so much, or just sufficient, to make them dangerous. So in February 1919, they lag these spaces. That is an instruction just written in chalk, and that means that it shows where the timber battens are going to go, and they're going to put in timber, and behind that they're going to put asbestos flagging.
This stuff.
Anthophyllite, which, has anybody heard of anthophyllite? I'm willing to, I take a bet that everybody in this room has seen it. Everybody's seen The Wizard of Oz. There's a scene in The Wizard of Oz where Dorothy falls asleep and it's snowing over a... Okay. The snow is anthophyllite, it was asbestos. That's how they did it in Hollywood in 1939. This stuff actually... obviously it's Dick's anthophyllite, and he can't spell anthophyllite either, he's got antwophylite. There's been many joys of this whole project, but actually one of the real joys is working with the asbestos removal team, and Pete, I can't remember his surname now, but Pete, the asbestos guy, who had a passion for the history of asbestos like nothing you've ever heard. And for me, it just went to show there's no such thing as a boring subject, only a boring speaker. And anthophyllite was mined for a matter of months in the early 20th century at a mine in Finland. So it's actually incredibly rare. I don't think he'd ever seen it before, had he? And quite how the Royal Navy had come to hold this stuff, we don't know. But as Jeff says, 1919, the decision is made to send Caroline out to the East Indies. She's taken in to Pembroke, and as we said, 20 years previously, everything would have been a beautiful plan. It would have been sent to Pembroke Yard. This was going to be lagged with a specification. In 1919, the bloke goes round the ship with chalk and writes instructions on the bulkhead, lag it. And at the back of that, they pour this stuff in, which is pretty horrendous stuff to deal with. It has to be said.
It's not been milled. It's pretty raw, so it's turned up almost as it comes out the ground. It's odd. It looks as if it comes off a bush, but it doesn't. It comes out the ground. There's a little bit more in a tube. It was also peppered with these flakes of silica. The best way to photograph them was hold them up to the sun. These sort of 50p sized flakes of silica. So it's extraordinary stuff. But back to the archaeology. So there's our uncovered shell racks. There is a little bit more of evidence. So there's a hastily painted sign. It's a 4-6-inch magazine, and that's what it's got in it. And we think the rack on the left was where the thermograph was resting. Next door, meanwhile, the magazine has been turned into a shell room, and those structures you can see at the top, where the wooden battens would have held the cases of ammunition in place, are no longer. They don't relate to those shelves at all. So they're left over from its previous life. We do have shell rooms on Caroline that actually demonstrate how they work. You can see here the slots into which the timber battens slide. And that suddenly makes sense of those previous photographs, because we can imagine that there's row upon row of shelves, and as you put in the next row, you slide down another batten to keep it in place. And that has its original notice, which someone has taken a lot more time over painting. But then you see, it's giving us even that one notice, the way the projectile bags, 6-inch projectile bags, the way that shells were transported around the ship, it all makes sense of other. They were put in a canvas bag with rope handles and carried around. And that shell room is still intact, helps to form the other one. Next door is this space here. Again, a similar story. It was reconstructed in October 18 and then hastily lagged in February 1919, and you can see the chalk arrow at the back. So the bulkhead on the right, which is white, wasn't lagged, and that's why it's had some modern white paint thrown on it. The other two bulkheads you can see, all those greasy finger marks must date from between October 18 and February 19. And you can even see where it was all done so quickly that the chap who was sent down to paint the black skirting has got as far as his brush could take him, because it's already got battens and casing. He's got as far as he can possibly paint. It's got a shower system because it's a magazine. And there, the brown bits of modern boiler that have been stored down there. But again, you can see white paint. He's got as far as he can possibly reach. There's the slots where the battens would go. He's got as far as he can possibly reach on the left-hand side inside that cage. And the two pink squares, one is going to have had a notice on it that said listed what was in it, and the other one's probably going to have the thermograph on it. And you can see where, as the men were climbing the ladder, they were resting their hands on the top of that to give them a little bit of purchase, hence the little white line around the edge and the dirty, greasy fingerprints.
And it was
Fantastic.
particularly you could reach out and
Yeah.
put your hand on that handprint, and that, you know, we deal with a lot of archives and things that aren't terribly human. But when you get someone like that and you're dealing with a 100-year-old handprint, it is just one of those nice moments in the project.
And because that was then lagged, A, it's protected from being painted over, but it's also given us this little time capsule, fantastic little time capsule. And you can see the relationship between the bulkhead on the left and the grey ladder, not the modern red ladder, but the grey ladder. And there's the paint, where the painter has just managed to get as far as he can with his brush. Paint, now that brings us on to paint sampling. We wanted to understand the paint. We had a fantastic paint garage, or we thought we did. We wanted to understand the paint because also we were dealing with such a mess internally that to tell a coherent story, we needed to do something about paint. Rather just decide, let's paint it white. We would ideally like to paint it an original scheme. So here we are, scraping away at the layers, trying to identify the colours and, in this case, different skirting heights. Because this is the sort of thing we're having to deal with. Once we strip off modern plywood or formica, we're dealing with something that it's not pleasant, it's not comprehensible. And what we really need to do is turn it into something that visitors can understand. But it'd be nice to do that in the context of the archaeology. This is a fantastic piece of archaeology. Here we have, this is taken off a deck, it's taken off a ceiling. We've got a red lead primer. We've then got this black line here, this brown line. That's tobacco smoke. So the deck head was red primer for long enough for an accumulation of tobacco smoke. And it was in the Marines mess. Then at a later date it was given a cream primer and then some white on top of that. In fact, the big dark brown, that's cork, including that's often the case. Cork will be mixed with paint as a sort of insulation. So when it came to refurbish the Marines mess, we thought we were going to paint the deckhead red because that's what the evidence is supplying. The rest of the colour scheme, it's also based on, and there's a little tiny bit of the original colour scheme poking through where a structure has been removed. The thing is, revealed like that, because it's been hidden for 100 years, we actually have to scrape those colours away and treat them with UV light to bring them back to their authentic colour. We can't just take the colour straight off the steel, as it were.
You're very lucky in the Royal Navy because if it moves, you salute it, and if it doesn't, you paint it. So there's a lot of painting that goes on. And this is a technique we developed on HMS Victory in Portsmouth for looking at 200 plus years of history. We did it a little bit on M33, another World War I ship we have in Portsmouth. But I think Caroline is really where it came into its own. And because the Royal Navy, although the plans decrease in detail, they're all dated, we know when this bulkhead went in. So if we can see, well, obviously that was painted before that bulkhead went in. The first coat of paint here, beyond that, was painted just after. You can then pinpoint the changes in the scheme of decoration. So when you come round the ship, you're not seeing what we think it might probably look like. you're not seeing the nearest colours Dulux will do for us. You are seeing exactly the colour that were used on board the ship in 1914, 1916. And the other thing that you will probably not pick up on as you go around is that in almost every area, the height of the painted skirting changes. And it turns out that that's a mark of your social rank, really. In the captain's quarters, where you're really quite a neat chap and not at all grubby, the skirting's about 3 inches high. When you get to the warrant officers, who, you know, aren't quite as clean and decent chaps, you're probably at a 6 inch. And if Jeff just goes back to the previous slide in terms of the skirting, you'll see in here with the Marines, who are obviously scruffy sods, the skirting board is actually 1 metre deep, just because they're that little bit more dirty. So you do begin to pick these things out. We found the same with tiles to a lesser extent, didn't we? That the type of tile you had on board Caroline reflected your social status.
So the paint, it's as good as tree rings. You can actually, by spotting the same paint on different structures, you can actually begin to date them, and it actually starts to inform what you do with those structures. Cabin doors, dark varnished. We had nothing to believe that they weren't original, but nothing really to suggest that they were. And they seem a little bit elaborate, a little bit heavy, brass handles on them. So we started to take them apart. Lo and behold, when we took, so if we go back and you can see we've got the solid panel at the top of the door. Once we've taken that off, what we revealed was a metal louver, a jalousie, with thick paint on it. So clearly the covering, that panel hadn't gone on for until really quite recently. There was then evidence the rest of the door had been chemically stripped and then varnished. And the same mouldings that had been used originally to hold the jalousie in, been reused. They'd even used the same nail holes, so that we could tell that the mouldings were original, the panels were not. And in fact, our doors, if we strip them down properly, should look like that. We then discover that the bottom panel here isn't plywood, isn't timber, it's steel. The idea being, if you were stuck in your cabin, if your door failed, if you couldn't get out for any reason, you could just kick that panel out. It wouldn't splinter, it wouldn't kick it out, it's steel, and out you can get, escape. It's also giving you lots of nice ventilation. So I imagine that the cabins became rather more sweaty once they blocked up all of that. But it informed what we were going to do. We looked at the handles next, and we had evidence for those handles being on the doors. We've got the same 6 screw holes going right the way through. Depth of paint around. Those handles are original, which supports what we were saying about the ship being designed pre-war with nice brass handles and cabin doors and bulkheads to all the cabins.
Towel rails and...
As soon as Caroline was finished, they changed the orders for the next ones. No cabin doors, no bulkheads, just curtains. And there's a whole list of bookshelves and towel rails that were missed out because it was war. You had to build these quicker and cheaper.
And interesting, that's exactly the same 150 years earlier when Nelson is around. When you're in times of peace, the ships are fitted out really quite elaborately. In times of war, all of that comes out and it's much more cheap and cheerful, much more serviceable.
So I think we would be, we're happy to believe, we know that the doors from paint analysis are painted in a cleanable white, a gloss white, so it's ink white. So it's not a pure white, it's a slightly creamy white. And there you can see our brown courtesine replicated flooring, the brown skirt at the bottom, and the sort of pale, creamy coloured the rest of the structures. So that's our reconstructed scheme with our doors in the form that we believe they were originally. The holy grail in all this was the external colour. Everywhere we looked, we had lots and lots of layers of paint. So here's a door. We took samples on this door here. We actually know from the door it's an A-type door, meaning it's a top-rate, waterproof, watertight, weathertight door. There's all the stamps to prove it. There's a date, 30th of June 1914. So we have a door that has been on the ship all that time. But the paint sample on the right is just lacking all of the early data. We've got a pale grey at the bottom and then white. We know she was painted white to go to the Far East. We haven't got any of our early scheme. So we went back to the plans. There's our assessment of the various. But as you can see, fantastic fantastic when you put it under the microscope, just how much paint there was on that door. So we went back to our plans and we tried to find areas of the ship that might possibly hold some clues to the original colour. That heating pipe is now gone. But here we have the officers' toilets, the officers' heads on the forecastle. That's the bridge above, the structure beneath. So that's the little box just behind the mast there on the left. That's the officers. So there's a toilet in there, a head in there for the officers. Quite early on, the open bottom of the bridge was closed off to form was it chart rooms? I think they were looking for a bigger chart room. So we've got an area that had a skylight below it. It had been closed off because they'd sealed off the bottom of the bridge, and it's got a water tank that supplied the toilets for the seamen on the other side. So we thought if anywhere is going to have some original paint, it might just be here, in that one little location where you can just see the sort of slightly thicker, because it's quite hard to get to. You've really got to go quite out of your way to scrape the paint off that. And much to our delight, we actually found we had the full sequence of paint. So we've got the original red lead primer from launch. We've got then a series of greys that vary in colour. We've then got another line of red, which, Andrew, you looked at the records and thought that fitted probably the major refit of 1917. And then we've got East Indies colours coming in again, the white colours, and then we've got Belfast greys, and then a series of modern paints. And you can see actually how the modern paints are much more consistent in their makeup. And what you see, the specs are actually individual grains of pigment. But there we have the sequence from build, and in there somewhere is the colour she was painted at Battle of Jutland. Let's go back to Mr. Crick's diaries, because he says here, Thursday, November 25th, the fleet under Jellicoe is painted very dark grey, almost black, whereas the battle cruiser fleet colour is almost white. Now we have joined up with the Grand Fleet, our colour has to be changed. Too wet to continue painting, so Hans had to make amend after dinner. So we're too light. Our grey is too light. We've joined up the ships, they're much darker than us. We shall have to go darker. So the colour we chose for the exterior of those two options was the darker grey, supported by evidence, maybe circumstantial evidence from Crick's diaries. This photograph turned up fairly late in the day. It did take us by surprise.
And this is Cornwallis album.
This is the Cornwallis album, June 1915. And at first sight you might say, oh, it's dazzle painting. Dazzle painting it didn't come about, it wasn't invented, if you like, until 1970. This we believe to be, it's a very early experiment by Scots hunter and zoologist, who was observing camouflage in nature. So he came up with the idea of concealing camouflage. The idea was that you concealed the shape rather than dazzled it and made it peculiar to look at. It is Caroline. It's June 1915, which makes it extremely interesting. What came up next, and this is very, very recent. When did you come up against this one? This is
3 weeks ago.
3 weeks ago we found this.
So this is the Captain Cook's pocket diary, and it's about that tall. Reading it is quite difficult. So the day before, the 26th of December 1914, ship's butchers washed overboard while she's out on patrol. So they just held the court of inquiry, and then on 28th of December, a Monday, it's a fine day, dried out and began painting ship zebra fashion, which is a really lovely description that ties it all together. And we always suspected the June 1915 date was a little late for it. We guessed, I think, late 1914, early 1915, and here we have evidence. These diaries are a wonderful mix of very professional and extraordinarily personal, and they are quite fun reading, because we met some of his, not direct descendants, but members of the family, and there's one great aunt who certainly remembers Crook in his later days as quite a stentorian figure who was to be imagined. It turns out when he's appointed to Caroline, he's got 2 women on the go, and he chucks one over for Lilith, and
And then you get L, and then you get funny little symbols next to her name when he meets her. And there's a code to them, but I think Jeff and I, we're too much gentlemen to try and work out what they mean. We're not going to try too deeply. But they are really rather fun to find the Edwardian process of courtship. And his parents are very upset with him. So later in 1915, he writes, it's almost a year exactly after this, 40 today, did not celebrate my birthday at all, because he's in a fit of pique with Lilith. And a couple of days earlier, when he said to his parents he's made his choice, he's chucked this other girl over, and Lilith is the very one for him. They write cutting off his allowance, because of course that in the Edwardian times you received an allowance. He's furious with this, and he spends the day drafting letter after letter after letter, and sending them over to Lilith for her to proof them and check them and advise them before he sends them on to his parents. One of the surprising things is the efficiency of the postal service.
It's
actually it's quite remarkable.
Yeah, he's writing 5 or 6 letters a day, and he expects a reply the day after next. I mean, it says something, tells you
every
something
2 or 3 days.
the efficiency of the postal
yeah.
service. So zebra
And there was
fashion.
Scapa Flow, about as far north as you can get.
Zebra fashion. So a bit more about engine, the turbines. Another space that needed to be decontaminated, and when we came to Carolina, we found them painted in the grey colour we have here. They were stripped of their paint to decontaminate them, but back to the paint sampling, we just had years and years and years of red lead. She went to see both the engine rooms and the boiler rooms were painted red lead. They weren't finished, there was no top coat on that, it was just the red primer. So that's the turbines themselves. They arrived with a rather thinned out white primer from the manufacturer, then nothing else had been done to them at all. So we've got a red leaded engine room space with turbines with a rather thin coat of watered down primer. Then you can see the aluminium paint, and that's a modern paint that's been applied in relatively recent times. So a plan was, we will paint the engine rooms red lead, and we'll give the turbines a coat of white primer. In fact, when we had stripped off the modern paint, it was as if the clouds parted.
We've got effectively assembly instructions almost.
So it's the port forward engine. So it's the engine on the left hand side of the ship. It's the forward one, and it's in the forward engine room, and it's job number 1585.
Because yards are turning out dozens of these engines at any one time, and they're not all interchangeable. All of the parts are bespoke. So it's very difficult for you to take a nut from over there and put it into a screw over here, because it really won't work for the vast majority of items, which is why as you go through you find that everything is numbered.
Everything is numbered. So there's a different part of a different engine. This is the starboard forward engine room. Job number 1585 here, so they've all got the same job number. But then we started looking at the bolts. Now these are big bolts. I mean, obviously that's a large boat, but it's
3 inches. 3 inches tall, and you've got so it's the starboard forward engine for job number 1585, and it's the 25th bolt on the casing, and the casing down here is also stamped. So the nut and the bolt on the underside and the position in the casing are all stamped, and there are hundreds and hundreds, so 131,
That's 131. Starboard, this is starboard aft, this time SA, 1585. They're all being stamped like that. We then got we've got test data. So we've got the valve chest and the nozzle box, and we know that on the, what is that? Is that the 11th?
So we've got the 11th of May 1914, and I think the 20, or is it just the 2nd of June 1914, the pressure testing to £470, £370. So that's probably being done in the factory before it's put into the ship.
But remember, she's not launched until September, so the engines are already up to steam halfway through the build process. Then there's this piece, and what we've just said about interchangeability, suddenly we're thrown actually something rather interesting. Forward engine room, on the left there, except it isn't, it's in the aft engine room. And then it says starboard aft, and in fact it isn't starboard aft, it's port aft side, and it's got job number 1506. So this is apart from another job. It's in the wrong place in the engine room, on the wrong engine, but it fits. And clearly, well, the only explanation can be that in order to finish Caroline, they're borrowing bits from the next job so that they can actually get Caroline.
You've probably got a
out
failed
of the
casting or something like that, where you've not had the opportunity to go back. You can't hold the ship up because there's penalties beginning to be introduced. And so, well, that will do. We'll jimmy it. It is a fairly standard piece. It's unlike nuts, bolts, and steam fittings, and in it goes.
So our decision when it came to presenting the engine room was to use a conservation treatment on the engine themselves, not give them their white primer. I think we would have struggled to know where to stop and start with the white primer. So they've been given a wax oil treatment, which is a conservation treatment. We have painted the engine rooms red, and we constructed a gantry so that visitors can actually go down and see those spaces and make them accessible. It was a fairly tight fit, but we're pleased with that particular result. Where's all this information? You know, here we are. We're talking about it, and this is really the tip of an iceberg. There's so many other spaces we could talk about that we haven't shown. Out of all this, it fed into the interpretation. A 3D model was an important part of that, but we're even working things into it like Crook's fighting stations. His instructions for where the gun should point at action stations. 20 degrees left and right, 20 degrees red and green, as he says, which is what we've done with our guns. Our torpedo tubes, which you haven't really talked about at all. She did have torpedoes. There's a torpedo room where they were stored. His special box, and his box, he invented a box. Crick writes about it in his diary. Captain invented a box, an arm-proof box on the deck for 2 more torpedoes, so we don't have to try and reload from the store, from the magazine during sailing. That isn't on any drawing that we've come across. It might just be on a distant photograph, but it isn't documented. The 3D model we're using this is in our virtual access suite. So this is creating access on a level so that we can people who are not happy with stairs, not happy with using a lift, but want to engage with the ship.
Or indeed just spaces you cannot get into.
And the majority, we try to concentrate on spaces to talk about today that you really just cannot get to. So using what we know, the 3D model, the archaeology, we can cut away the ship, identify all these spaces, and then let people engage with this archive and a lot more that we've talked to you about this afternoon. We can also build all of that into a series of animated movies showing people how the ship worked, bringing all this, really the story we told you, bringing all this together, bringing these archives together, explaining how it worked. So we end up with the Caroline that you see. It isn't a pedantic 1916 recreation. If it was a pedantic Jutland recreation, we'd have to take the tripod mast down. She didn't have that. But hopefully, we've put enough back. We've made sensible decisions about what we preserve, what we restore, what we replace, what we simply conserve and keep, like the engines. There she is today. She's about to have her bottom painted.
Yes, so we'll be dry docking. We intend to go into dock on the 27th of next month, and she'll be gone for about 6 weeks. And then she will return looking better than she has done since, I would suggest, 31st of May 1916.
So of those 2 structures that I said, well, one of them was going to survive and one of them wasn't, there's our drill hall. It still survives. Drill hall is fundamental to her being in Belfast. When she came to Belfast, the first thing that was done, that was construct a Harlem Wall, was a gunnery school. They moved the guns into there, big open space. It now provides us with a fantastic space for setting the scene and for entertaining. It was built in 1954. It's too significant and too important to be removed simply so we can put back a lot of the ship that is now missing, which will all be replica anyway. The space that did fail, and it was its own, in the end, it was its own worst enemy. The Admiral Flat on the back of the ship was in such poor condition, and more to the point, it was destroying the original structure it sat on, but that was a difficult decision we made. It was built in 1939, but that was a decision where we did remove the structure because actually it was destroying the rest of the ship. And I think that's taken us
And we're more or less bang on an hour.
So hopefully if you do ask questions, but if you need to go, then understand that. But that's sort of quick trot through archaeology and restoration, Caroline.